one of my favorite entrepreneurs, Dr. Alfred Nobel, who was probably one of the greatest Swedish entrepreneurs. He was an inventor, he was a business builder. He had severe recurring depressions, and of course he donated his entire estate to create the Nobel Prize. Econa is a global center of excellence for entrepreneur mental wellness. I'm a researcher as well as an entrepreneur and a psychiatrist, and my colleagues and I have been looking into this issue for many years now, and we've discovered, as have many other researchers now, that there's a very significant incidence of mental health issues and challenges among entrepreneurs, including in our most recent study of 1,000 entrepreneurs. We found a 3% suicide attempt rate, and 1.7% of this sample of entrepreneurs reported having had a psychiatric hospitalization. So we would like to do something about that. As we'll see today, mental health symptoms can derail founders, causing significant personal as well as firm level and ecosystem damage. So we'd like to invite you to imagine with us the possibility of an emotionally intelligent innovation ecosystem where founders and companies and regions can be well and can grow together and thrive. And their solutions are possible, but we're going to need to roll up our sleeves and work together in order to build and to share those solutions. So I'd like to invite you to engage with Econa if you're interested in that mission. We partner with all kinds of organizations to assess the needs of entrepreneur communities. We develop programs and services, we conduct research, we facilitate peer groups, we consult, and kind of anything. We're here to help you if you're interested in moving the needle on entrepreneur mental wellness. So without further ado, I would like to introduce two very special people who have agreed to join us today and help us understand depression among founders. We're going to hear first from John Roa, a very successful entrepreneur I've gotten to know over the last several months. John is a serial entrepreneur who has founded half a dozen companies or more. He began kind of at age 11 being a technologist, and most recently he grew a company that he'll tell you about, Okta, from scratch with no investor, no venture capital participation, and kind of propelled it to double-digit, triple-digit growth, and had a big exit to Salesforce, and in the process kind of wiped out emotionally, ended up in a psychiatric hospital, had major depressive episodes, and had the courage to write about it in this book that just came out recently, A Practical Way to Get Rich and Die Trying, in which he shares the entire journey, including the mental health journey of that process. And we'll also hear from Dr. Christine Guptel. She is an assistant professor and vice chair of research at the University of Ottawa. And she's the co-author of an article that came out in August of 2020, Depression Among Entrepreneurs, a Scoping Review, which reviews all the literature that there is in the scientific community about depression among entrepreneurs. So we're going to be very eager to hear from both of our colleagues today. And at this point, let me ask John if I could give you a hard time here for a minute. But before I give you a hard time, I again want to thank you for being here, and particularly thank you for having the courage to share your story publicly. It's not something a lot of entrepreneurs are willing to do yet, but maybe with you as a guide and a role model, we'll be able to entertain these conversations more frequently and help normalize the conversation about entrepreneur mental wellness. In your book, you write about 2 major depressive episodes in your life. One of them happened when you were 11 years old, and the other, oh, excuse me, one of them happened when you were 17 years old, and the other happened when you were in your 30s, kind of on the exit path from Okta.
Yep.
So let me just ask you to introduce yourself here and give us a little context about how we should listen to your story, and then I'll ask you to explain to everybody, what is it like to be severely depressed? What were those episodes like for you?
Definitely. Well, first of all, nice to meet everyone. I'm John Roa. It's great to see everyone here, and the ones who don't have their video on, nice to meet you as well. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm appreciative that Econa is doing this. Dr. Freeman is truly a special person in this world, and we've come to be close friends in the last 3 or 4 months. We met through kind of the process of me releasing a book and me doing a podcast on the topic. And I could not be more happy that we have Dr. Freeman and his team taking on this role to try to provide some research and data and statistics around some of these issues that we kind of have some kind of new age don't ask, don't tell policy about amongst entrepreneurs. I find that to be a massive issue. And in telling my story, you'll see that I have experienced the best and worst that comes along with entrepreneurship, and it's a topic that I am deeply passionate about talking about, even when it's not easy to do so. I've been a pretty private person for most of my life, so having these discussions is very strange and very uncomfortable in many ways, but it's truly important. And even writing the book, every single day, I found a reason to get rid of it, to dump it, to delete it, to never publish it, because I was mortified of admitting these things. I was mortified of the consequences of having these conversations out loud. But a lot of amazing people pushed me to put it out there, and I could not be happier that I have. And so it came out about 3 months ago, and the reception, especially amongst folks like yourselves, has been tremendous. And so I'm just very appreciative of this opportunity to be here with Dr. Freeman and the Econa team, and especially all of you. So to get some context as to how this all came to be, I'm an entrepreneur through and through. My first tech company, well, I started programming when I was 11 years old. I started a tech company at age 14. I'm now 37, so 2/3 of my life I've been running technology-based companies. And at the beginning, I didn't know that there was a term for entrepreneurship. There were no entrepreneurs in my family. I grew up in an immigrant household in the suburbs of Detroit. My father was a career engineer at Chrysler, so there was nobody starting businesses. There was nobody that had any kind of outside success around me. All I knew that I was designed to solve problems, to start things, and I was drawn to it from a very, very young age. And learning computers and having affinity for technology just gave me a way to do that. And so I got started a bit too early, a bit, a very undeveloped time and place in my life of taking on these kind of big roles. And even by age 17, as Dr. Freeman said, I had a pretty successful business. We were doing computer repair in Detroit. So kind of like the Geek Squad, pre-Geek Squad. We'd go to people's homes and offices and fix their computers on the spot. And by age 17, the business was 3 years old, and I had employees and trucks and offices and billboards, and we were a growing company. And I was on the verge of dropping out of high school to focus on it full time. And what happened instead was through a very strange conversation with a family friend who introduced me to taxes, which I'd never heard the term in my life and didn't know why they were relevant to someone like me. I realized I had to incorporate my business. And when I went to do so, they said, "Kid, you're 17 years old, you cannot incorporate a business." And so instead of being smart and asking my parents, I asked my best friend, who was a year older than me, who was 18 years old, because he was 18, he was legally allowed to. We were going to work together. I wanted him to come into my business. And so he registered the business and all the assets were moved over there. And I see a lot of heads nodding, so you can all see what happened next. Said best friend for, at that point, 15 years, decided that, well, it was him and his father collectively decided that they were better off with the business than me. And I was handed an envelope with about $3,000 in it, and told that they were taking the business over and that I had no part in my own business anymore. And it was the first time that I can remember experiencing true depression. I had lost my best friend. I had lost my business. I had lost hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, which to our household was an extraordinary amount of money. And it was the first time I had felt things like emptiness, like meaninglessness. I truly didn't see a purpose of continuing to move on with my life. I didn't think it was ever going to get better. I truly believed that the feelings that I felt then would never, ever, ever expire. And that was just going to be the new normal for me forever. I had never cried so hard. I had never felt so alone. And it was a horrible moment. And it was really, it was tragic. And it was one of those times that I can look back to that guided many changes in my life for the next, what is now 2 decades. But as a true entrepreneur, within some weeks of that, and again, I had vowed to never start another company. I had vowed to never play this stupid game ever again. Within about 3 weeks, I'd started another company. And that company was now with a bunch of other guys I'd met in California. We started a video game marketing company, and then it just went from there. Just businesses and business and failures and bad stories and bad experiences and bad partners, but just kept going. And I didn't know what else to do. I was a crappy student. I didn't have I had nothing else going for me except what I thought was my ability to potentially at some point figure this thing out. And fast forward about 10 years from the first kind of bout, I was in Chicago. This is 2010, so a little over 10 years ago. Found a company called Okta. And for those of you who know IDEO, the famed design consultancy, I basically built a digital version of IDEO, a design consultancy where we would do user experience design and interface design for big companies. And we had amazing clients, Starbucks and United Airlines and NASA and all these different brands. And when I started it, I had no reason to start this company. I'm not a designer. I never worked for a design company. I just thought it was an interesting idea. I hoped I could sell it. I thought it was maybe the right market opportunity. But past that, I had nothing going for me. I was also about $180,000 in debt off the back of failed startups and traveling and being an idiot and doing different things. So I was not in a great position as a whole. And so this business started to work, and it started to work better than it ever should have, quite frankly. It became one of the fastest growing companies in the world. It was the single fastest growing agency of any kind on the planet. Dr. Freeman said it was 2 and 3 digit growth. It's actually 4 digit growth, which is a ridiculous thing for an agency when all you have is people. And so scaling people at thousands of % per year is a bit nuts. And in the success, as kind of the one side of the world was moving one way, I was making money. I paid off my debts. I was becoming successful. People were talking about me. They wanted to talk to me. I was being put on magazine covers and TED Talk stages. My personal life was going the perfectly opposite direction just as quickly, to where I didn't know how to handle the stress and the risk and the pressure. I felt that I was a fraud. I felt that I didn't deserve or belong there whatsoever, that I had faked everything that I have. And at some point, every person would find out and strike me down, that I would lose it all, et cetera, et cetera. And both of these things built in succession. They were perfectly intrinsically linked for the next 3 years until I was 30 years old. At this point, I'd become a millionaire at age 29, which is also a whole different ball of wax for what it does to your psyche and to your person. I did not handle it well. I did not know how to manage it. I had no one to tell me how to manage it. And so I went off the deep end. It was drugs, it was sex, it was partying, it was all of the things that you do when you're out of control, when you don't know how to handle yourself and your life and your perceived success, even though you don't believe it, it really is success. And the second kind of bout that Dr. Freeman spoke to happened a series of months later after egregiously bad behavior and self-destructive tendencies. I was a very misbehaved person for a long time. And what that led to was a psychotic break where I suffered dissociative amnesia and ended up in a hospital after blacking out one evening. And I gained consciousness about 3 days later, even though I had been speaking to the doctors in between. I have no recollection of it because I was in a fugue state. I was in a dissociative state. So I didn't know who I was, where I was. They feared I'd had a stroke. They didn't know if or when I'd recover, if or when I'd remember who I am and who my person is. And it took about 3 days to get there. And it can take between hours and years. So I could have been in this state for years, and that's what they were most scared of. And coming out of that and realizing just how close you were to dying, to how far you've pushed it, to the multiple lines that you've crossed for so long, and then what that does to your psyche, while still being the CEO of one of the fastest growing companies in the country, it was a very hard place. And I entered a truly severe depression. It was difficult to do anything. And I could fake my ability to do my job. Maybe it's not fake. I could do my job. I could walk in, put the suit on, crush a business sale, have a meeting, or do whatever I needed to do. But the moment no one was looking, I was debilitated. I couldn't get out of bed. Every light bulb, was burning to my vision. Everything was just colorless and awful. I asked myself daily if any of this was worth it, if I should just call it quits. I could not remember a time before being depressed. I totally forgot that there was a such thing as not being depressed. It had taken over everything that I could imagine. I couldn't even fathom how it may ever go away at some point. It seemed so permanent and so real. And I also felt like the first and only person to ever experience it. I was not speaking openly about it. I was not getting support. And so I felt like that no one could relate. No one has ever experienced this. I was the only one, and therefore, why would I talk to anybody about it? And it was awful. And it lasted for a long time, ironically, into the most successful part of the venture, which was selling the company to Salesforce. And so the 9-month process of selling my business to Mark Benioff and Salesforce was during the height of this depression, which was quite challenging, as I'm sure you can appreciate. And what's most stunning is I sell the business and we get to the promised land, what every entrepreneur wants to do. And you become wealthier than you can ever comprehend, which is not necessarily a great thing, but it happens and you're done. You can retire, you can do whatever you want to do. And my depression got about 5 times worse afterwards because this amazing distraction that I had was now gone. I could not hide behind being busy and being a CEO and whatever else, and everything just came rushing to the forefront. And I was very lucky to meet a doctor at that point in Chicago who guided me for the next 9 months through recovery. And it started off, very hard, and it was hard the entire way, but you started to see the light, came back and the world came back, and it was a very challenging year. But it was about a year after selling the company that I could actually sit and not shake and not have a panic attack and see color again and all these things. It took a long time. And I was lucky to be able to have that support and the time to give myself to do it. And so, it was in reflection of all of that in the years after that I decided this is way too important to talk about. This is something I should not pretend that it was easy and graceful and cool and sexy and the things that I projected, that I wanted to share the real stories to hopefully create some kind of support, maybe for the next version of me that's coming down the path. So that's me, that's my story. As Dr. Freeman said, it's encapsulated in this book. And it's something that I know I think he's gonna read some passages over. I'd love to answer any and all questions. As you can probably tell, I'm an open book at this point. And so thanks for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing from Christine and then answering your questions.
John, thank you so much for sharing that story with us. And I just have to say for myself, I kind of experienced your emotions as you were telling the story, and they're very powerful emotions. It's hard to put into words, but I think you did it very eloquently.
Thank you.
Dr. Guptill, let me ask if you could fill us in and put it in context. What did we just hear? You reviewed the entire scientific literature on entrepreneur depression. How does John's story fit with what the researchers have been finding when they look at large groups of entrepreneurs and ask these questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it fits quite well, don't you? Like I mean, it's interesting because of course there's some variability, and we'll talk about that when I show some of my stuff from the review that we did. So not everyone has, you know, this story, but it's not uncommon, and that's what got us started on this project in the first place. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that I think is really key. And when John and Michael and I were speaking before the session started, I would say that that's the common theme, is that we feel so strongly that people need to understand that it's not uncommon, and that, you know, that breaking down of that stigma is really, really critical.
Well, maybe you can tell us, how many articles did you read? How much literature is there? How many articles did you review, and how common is this?
Yeah, do you want me to like show my pictures? I can do that.
Go right ahead. Yeah.
Here, I'll just throw up some slides because I'm an academic and I can't help myself, right? So I'll just do this. Can you see them?
Yes.
Great, super. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I could back up and just say there's someone really important in the audience today, and I'll talk about her in a few minutes, but this all started because I am quite interested in musicians' health, and musicians are a type of entrepreneur as well, kind of an interesting, unique type of entrepreneur. And this dear friend of mine, Kristen Darga, who is the CEO of Impact Founder, and I got talking because Kristen was doing some work, and I'll discuss that just really briefly at the end. And I said, you know, we really need to look at how much of this is out there in the scientific literature, because she and I knew that it was out there in the public, but I had a sneaking suspicion it wasn't in the scientific literature. So more than I expected, but not as much as we'd like to see. So that's me on the right-hand side being my musician. I don't get paid to do music very often, but I do sometimes. So yeah, there were 34 articles that we reviewed. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not a very big review. So in academia, we're used to seeing quite a lot bigger numbers than that. And that was papers that were published between 1987 and 2019, because we stopped in 2019, even though the paper came out in 2020. And they've been increasing in numbers since 2003. So gradually us in the ivory tower are catching up with the rest of the real world that this is a big problem. And it's really only kind of coming to our attention more recently. So I just wanted to throw this up here. If you feel nerdy about theory like I do, what's interesting is that for one reason and another, and they're very complex reasons, some of us have more tolerance for things like stress and anxiety than others do. And that's okay. And so we can relate that to, you know, if we have a big shot of espresso before we pour our milk in, then it's going to overflow. Whereas if our espresso shot starts with a smaller shot, then we have more room for tolerance, right? So that's that sort of illustration of my nerdy theory, diathesis stress model. And I'm sure Michael could talk to you a little bit more about that as well. And so, you know, we obviously don't want to be on the left, but one of the reasons that I put this slide up, and I'm actually going to cheat because I just realized I can't see my notes, but I'm just going to kind of show this instead. When I share my screen, am I seeing my presenter view? Can I do that? Aha. Are you still seeing the presentation, or are you seeing my notes here too? It's okay if you
We're seeing your notes, but it's okay.
That's all right. So, you know, what's interesting is that some studies have shown that entrepreneurs are more at risk of depression, and other studies have shown less. It seems to vary quite a bit. That just really tells us that it's really complex, and that isn't a surprise to any of us, I don't think, because really, I mean, every business is different. So why would all entrepreneurs be the same? That wouldn't make any sense, right? But it was Michael's work that showed that about 30% more entrepreneurs in a comparison study with students and faculty had depression. And, you know, faculty members and students are stressed out people. So that's a pretty significant finding. And suicide, the prevalence does seem to be higher among entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs in limited liability companies were more at risk than, were less at risk than employees. And if you worked in the personal and cultural sector, so that includes things like restaurants, those people had less risk than in farming, fishing, and forestry. And I think that starts to speak to some of the risk factors that we'll talk about in a few minutes, which has to do a lot with isolation, which was one of the other questions that Michael asked me in an email, was to sort of highlight that piece. Okay. So I was going to say, don't we all know this image now, right? This is just so familiar. Isolation obviously plays a role in our mental health, and it's related to high workload and long hours and working in geographically isolated places. So those social supports that we need in our lives are really important, and they're indicators of our better overall health, not just depression, but they certainly do contribute to our mental health as well. So when we have that poor social support paired with stress, you know, that can be really a challenge for developing depression. And if we have to manage that workload ourselves without any social support, that can be a problem. And so those gaps between our social network might actually get worse because of our depressed mood. And, you know, that can be stressful in our relationships. We can have breakdown and divorce. And people with divorce are more likely to have depression and insomnia. On the other hand, and this is good, some entrepreneurs have a strong drive to independence and actually thrive on that. So it's not all bad news. So those long late hours can be a problem. They can disrupt our circadian rhythm. I'm sure Michael can talk a little bit more about that, but insufficient sleep can really be an issue and can impact on depression, and in fact is a symptom of depression. And so it can obviously impact our decision-making skills and increase our negative emotions and our confidence about business ideas. And even, you know, kind of that bad cycle of then we're not interested in working really long hours when we have problems with our sleep and we're lacking motivation. So Michael pointed out in his email, and it's so true, that many businesses fail, right? So what about failure and how does that impact depression? So people have a nasty tendency to associate business failure with personal failure. And when that happens, we can be at higher risk of suicide. And people with financial difficulty and a lack of self-confidence and self-efficacy, so feeling that they're effective, are more likely to have depressive symptoms. So when we've put a lot of ourselves in a venture, then that can be more challenging. And I'm sure that Michael will have a little bit more to say about that. So I wanted to talk here a little bit about some aspects that are common threads, and we've talked about a few of them already. So financial stress, uncertainty, slowdowns, the work sector that you work in, as I was talking about, the personal and social sectors are a little bit less risky. Work routines, so long hours and lack of social support are risk factors for sure. But then we also have some personality traits that can help us be more resilient. So if we are more of a risk taker, if we're more leadership oriented, if we're more organized and we have high self-efficacy and coping skills, then we actually can be drawn to and thrive in those environments. So I wanted to mention gender because what was so interesting to us as researchers, and I should have mentioned Lauren Cubbin's name. Lauren is the first author on this paper, and she was an occupational therapy student with me and really took this on and embraced it and did such an amazing job with putting together this paper. So we only found 3 papers where there were trends related to gender. And we know that less women enter entrepreneurship, and some studies say that more women have depression, and others actually say that less women have depression. But the problem with that is we're then assuming that we've only got binary, and every single study we looked at only assumed a binary representation, and that strikes me as a really big hole in our literature. And then we also know that among entrepreneurs, especially in the high-tech industries, women are less common, and therefore it's harder to find a mentor, it's harder to get that social support, and that might result in more isolation and a feeling that you've got to present yourself as being tough, and then hiding the signs and symptoms of depression. And of course, We know that's a big issue, particularly with men. We could talk about toxic masculinity, you know, that sort of sense that to be a man, you have to hide your emotions. But again, we're kind of making that basic binary assumption, which, you know, we probably should not be making because it's not the reality of what's out there in the world. And we definitely need more research. That's a really common, you know, if you get into reading research, if you read reviews, every review is going to say, we need more research in this area. That's what we do. So stigma, as we know, kind of we're suggesting in the previous slides, that fear of stigma can really cause people to internalize their emotion and not seek the support that they need socially and professionally. So there was a study that looked at people who died by suicide in the year prior. Many of them had unmanageable debt. And those people who died by suicide were less likely to seek help in that year prior to dying. And so there were a variety of reasons that different studies showed, like fear of societal perception of debt, spending a significant amount of time trying to manage that debt, which then left little time for seeking help. And those people who do experience depression, as John was suggesting, might actually lose their sense of reality. And then they may not even realize that it's their mental health that is at risk, and they may not then see the need for seeking assistance. So there's a variety of different kind of unfortunate cycles happening. And so this is where I wanted to give a shout out to Impact founder and my friend Kristen Darga. This is, you know, one of the positive spin-offs of kind of life exploring these things, is that Impact founder does this amazing photo. There's a book that came out with the photos that Kristen has put together, you know, looking at the reality, so the positive and the negative sides, and showing images of people that are dealing with this in daily life who are founders. And of course, this is Brad Feld, for those who may not recognize him. And I understand Brad is going to come into this series in the new year. Am I right, Michael? Yeah.
You are, yes.
And so this is an image from Kristen's book, Impact Founder, and really kind of trying to break up that stigma by showing the real sides of the stories, so that kind of pairing that my business was performing well and I had a significant depressive episode that lasted 6 months. So it's real, it's out there, and we can actually make a difference. So that's me.
Thank you so much. And the image of Brad Feld and his comment there really parallels what John said, which was that he was actually operating his business while he was in the midst of a significant depressive episode. I've definitely seen that in my experience as well. And so it's important to understand the kind of the nuance of depression, because it may not always be visible to everybody in your environment. And also, thanks for highlighting the issue of shame and stigma, which John also mentioned. It makes me think, you know, at Econa, we're trying to kind of move the needle on entrepreneur mental wellness. And it strikes me that anything we can do to reduce shame and stigma so that people can ask for help is kind of a step in the right direction. We will come back to both of you in a minute and have a conversation, but before we do, I am going to just make a few comments. I'm going to try to make a few comments, hold on, about what can be done about this. And I'm not going to particularly share medical advice. I think that's beyond the scope of what we can do here. Anybody who is experiencing depression, please get an opinion and a recommendation from a mental health professional. But I will talk about what we can do to overcome it from the perspective of both prevention. An ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure, even though our healthcare system doesn't seem to align the financial incentives that way, and from the perspective of self-care. As you just heard, depression is quite common among entrepreneurs, and fortunately, not only in the academic literature, but also in the popular press, there's been more and more and more attention to this issue in the last few years. Kristen Darga, who wrote that book, Impact Founders, in her part of the study that Dr. Guptill just mentioned, she did a review of the popular press stories in the media and blog posts about entrepreneur depression, and she had to quit because after she got to 100 of them, she realized it was just going to go on and on and on. So we are beginning to learn about this. And I think before we dive into the self-care side of it, it's important to recognize that depression is not all bad. It does have some benefits for entrepreneurs. You've heard of depressive realism. Entrepreneurs are notorious for having unrealistic ideas about what they can accomplish. When you're depressed, your judgment becomes more realistic. You have greater capacity for empathy, which allows you to bond with your team, with your customers, with your suppliers, with the investors. Depression helps entrepreneurs disengage from unattainable goals. And I'm sure the entrepreneurs in the group today have had plenty of opportunities to disengage from unattainable goals. That's what we do. We tend to kind of shoot for the moon and eventually recognize that it's not going to happen on this mission. Entrepreneurs can, when I say less distracted, I mean they can kind of perseverate on issues and become more analytic and more detail-oriented, and have been shown to be better at solving some complex social problems, as well as being better at making decisions that are sequential in nature. So depression is to some extent here for a reason. It's associated with hibernation if you're a bear. It's associated with grieving if you're almost any kind of mammal. And yet it can derail entrepreneurs and businesses. So in the group today, we have investors, we have economists, we have a lot of entrepreneurs, we have some ecosystem architects. Whatever your vantage point is, take a look at these symptoms: low motivation, low energy, low self-confidence, poor decision-making, can't pay attention, unable to plan, unable to execute, unable to lead, avoiding responsibility, negative emotions, all of these symptoms of depression, and just try to imagine the impact on your personal life and also on what is the impact on the business, what is the impact on the innovation ecosystem, what are the spillover effects of depression. Entrepreneurs have irregular sleep, don't enjoy life, withdraw, isolate, have reduced creativity, impaired memory, these hopeless, helpless, worthless feelings that are derailing on so many levels and have such a big impact. And this is one of the reasons why I think entrepreneur mental wellness is so important, because entrepreneurs are responsible for 30% of American jobs anyway, and 80 to 100% of net new jobs are attributable to companies that are less than 5 years old. So when entrepreneurs get derailed, the spillover effects are really quite massive. I'd like you to know that depression is not just one thing. There are a whole bunch of subtypes of depression, and you're not going to be able to figure it out for yourself in most cases. And so this is why I think you should get consultation from, if it gets to be severe, get a psychiatric consultation, because the way of treating all of these different subtypes of depression is different. It's not like one approach works for every single depressive subtype. Not only that, it's not on the slides, but depression also co-occurs with a lot of other mental health issues like anxiety, for example. And so when you get to this stage of needing help, somebody needs to sort out the kind of the nuances of how to help which aspects of that. However, there are a lot of things you can do to prevent yourself from being depressed in the first place. A study that just came out a couple months ago, looking at a really wonderful study that followed over 100,000 people for over 8 years to found out what are the things you can do, the modifiable risk factors that prevent depression. High on the list, screen engagement, unplug from your TV, computer, cell phone, daytime napping, sedentary behavior, got to get out of your chair, move around. Sunblock was a risk factor. You need sun exposure. Inconsistent diet, insufficient sleep, lack of exercise, all of these things are things that you can modify to reduce the risk that you're going to get depressed. Dr. Guptill talked about the risk factors associated with entrepreneurship, isolation, financial stress, failure, particularly your attitude about failure, burnout, and then the shame and stigma that gets in the way of asking for help. High on the list of how to prevent depression, social connection, particularly the single most powerful behavioral antidepressant was confiding in other people, visiting with friends and family, engaging in a cohesive, supportive community. It could be a soccer team, could be your church, it could be family sing-along, whatever it is, cohesion. And the benefits are amplified when you socialize in nature. Getting moderate to vigorous exercise most days was another very powerful behavioral antidepressant. Adequate regular sleep, Mediterranean diet, sunlight, nature exposure, activity in nature, limiting alcohol use. These are things you can change that are going to strengthen your resistance. If you're in treatment now, stay on your meds. There are some of these subtypes of depression where it's likely to come back. And those are the types that run in families. And John, maybe in the conversation that comes up, I'll ask if anybody in your family ever had a depression. It's common among entrepreneurs. And among all the supplements that you hear about, the only one where there's some real data is the omega-3 fatty acids, the fish oil. That can be preventative. Self-care, if you do get depressed, very important. These are some things you can do. Set and execute small goals, like cleaning the dishes. Try to smile, to play, to laugh, do anything pleasurable that used to be associated with positive moods. Exercise as much as you can. Communicate, don't withdraw, resist the temptation to isolate. Reach out to everybody in your inner circle and be social even though you don't feel like it. You want to deal with it, don't pretend it's not happening. Recognize the symptoms. Remember what you learned today. This is common. You're not the only person in the world that ever went through this. Know who to call, make an appointment, see a therapist, follow recommendations. If medications are prescribed, what I always tell patients in my practice is that medications work much better if you take them. So keep that in mind. Manage yourself. Plan your next day. Avoid situations that make depression worse. Don't believe all of the soundtrack that goes around in your head. Reframe negative thoughts and challenge the false beliefs. Solve problems with other people if you can. Practice mindfulness. Get a sense of detachment from the depression itself with radical acceptance, and by remembering to have gratitude for the positive things that are in your life. Maintain your daily routine, eat, sleep, bathe, and put yourself on a digital detox program, like stay off the screens. This is a phototherapy lamp. If you can't get out into the sunshine, these are the next best things. And in northern latitudes, they're very commonly used, and they work. So just nurture yourself. Do positive things like deep breathing, listening to music, taking a bath, lighting a candle, kind of self-compassion, self-care. And nature really does heal. Get sunlight, get fresh air, spend time with animals, bring in flowers into your home, listen to nature sounds. It has a very powerful effect. And that's all I'm going to say. I wanted to loop back to Alfred Nobel again. This is a picture by an artist, a painting of the sun by Edvard Munch, who also had depressions. And I just wanted to show this because I've been talking about sunlight so much, and also because this was the backdrop for the Nobel Prize award ceremony for the first decade or two that it was going on. Thank everybody for being here today. I thought everyone's participation really made such a big difference, and that we accomplished what we set out to accomplish. I'm very grateful for your support and engagement. I want to invite everyone to come back in a month. We're going to be talking about delinquents, dropouts, or world-class entrepreneurs. A fabulous entrepreneur, Alan Shaya, is going to share his experience getting tossed out of just about everything and getting in trouble as an adolescent. And then we'll review the literature on the how teenage rebels, and those, including a lot who have encounters with law enforcement, grow up to be entrepreneurs, and how disruption is supposedly a bad thing when you're a teenager, but a disruption is a good thing when you're an adult entrepreneur. So we'll look forward to seeing you in January. Again, I want to remind everyone to engage with us. If you have ideas about how to move the needle on entrepreneur mental wellness, we like to connect, and we like to be a catalyst to facilitate this kind of change. And finally, I'm just, on behalf of myself and Alice and Econa and everyone who's working together to make this possible, I'd like to thank Dr. Guptill and John very much for being with us today. Thank all of you. Wish you a really wonderful holiday season, and we hope to see you again in the new year. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.